The presidents of China and the United States hold a major virtual meeting. What will it mean for China-U.S. relations? Hi everyone, I'm Sean Caleb, filling in for Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden have engaged in a virtual summit that lasted more than 3 hours. The leaders discussing a range of critical issues, and the meeting has been described as candid and constructive. Here are some of what the two had to say.
A sound and steady China-U.S. relationship is required for advancing the two countries' respective development and for safeguarding a peaceful and stable international environment, including finding effective responses to global challenges such as climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. China and the U.S. should respect each other, coexist in peace, and pursue win-win cooperation. I'm willing to work with President Biden to build consensus and take active steps to move China-U.S. relations forward in a positive direction. Doing so will advance the interests of the two peoples and meet the expectation of the international community.
I'm happy we had found time to meet, and I look forward to a candid and forthright discussions like all the discussions we've had thus far. It seems to me our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States is to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict, whether intended or unintended. It seems to me we need to establish some common sense guardrails to be clear and honest where we disagree and work together where interests intersect, especially on vital global issues like climate change. How our bilateral relationship evolves seems to me will have a profound impact not only on our countries, but quite frankly, the rest of the world.
And in just a few moments, we'll get reaction from Chinese and U.S. experts. But first, we are joined from Bellevue, Washington, by former U.S. Ambassador to China, Gary Locke. Ambassador Locke, thanks very much for joining us here this evening. Certainly appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's my pleasure.
Do you think it's fair to call it a meeting? Is it more of a kind of initial discussion to sit down? It did last more than 3 hours, and of course, both leaders talking about everything that was so important to both nations, trying to find areas that they have in common, and of course, focusing on those areas where they do differ.
Well, I think just having a meeting, although it was virtual, is still very, very important. And I think both leaders in the segments and the clips that you just showed demonstrates the importance of the two leaders of our two great nations coming together and meeting. Obviously, it would be better if it had been in person, but because of the COVID restrictions and the busy schedules of both leaders, they weren't able to do that. But you first have to have these candid, heart-to-heart conversations to set the stage for progress on other issues, whether it's going to be improvements and resolution of some of the difficult issues on trade, climate change, or even human rights, or some of the military issues, such as the issues around Taiwan or the South China Sea. You first have to get together and to state your positions, understand each other, outline the priorities that each country has and that each leader has, and then go forward from there.
Let's pick up on that, because clearly they talked about some of those issues that you did talk about, including Taiwan. But how important is it for the two sides to meet? Is it just restating what they consider the most important points, or is there perhaps something that we can see and take heart that grew out of this and build on?
Well, President Xi and President Biden have met previously in different capacities as vice presidents. Their interactions have always been very cordial, very frank, always at ease with each other. And I think they're trying to build on that relationship now in their new roles as presidents. But it's important that they have that exchange, that they're able to get their issues and their guardrails or their bottom lines out in the open, and then move forward from those positions. So even though there were no agreements coming out of this particular summit, virtual summit, it was the beginning stage, the necessary first step to working on these other issues, whether it's issues of difference and contention or issues of common interest, such as climate change.
Yeah, and you talked about the two do have this history together. And I found it interesting that President Xi began by calling Joe Biden old friend, and you can talk about the significance of that as well. But President Xi stressed that the world's two largest economies need to have this increased communication. They need to be talking and be able to face their challenges together. When we look at the competition over trade and technology, is that going to happen?
Well, the United States and all countries have competition with other nations. That is to be expected. I mean, we have competition with Germany, our auto sectors, our telecommunications sectors, and with other countries, whether it's Japan and South Korea. So competition is healthy. It benefits the consumer. It benefits the world. The key is stable competition, healthy competition, competition on a level playing field and abiding by certain rules and expectations. That is the challenge. At the same time, our differences must not be allowed to devolve into conflict, because the world suffers if there's any type of military conflict between our two nations. And it's certainly would be devastating to China and devastating to the United States if we had any type of military conflict. So the challenge is to enable this competition on a fair, equal basis, on a level playing field, but also moving forward on issues of great interest and consequence, not just to China, not just to the United States, but the entire world. For instance, on climate change, if the United States were to make significant reductions in greenhouse gases and China does very little, our efforts in America will be for naught. By the same token, China is moving very aggressively on electrification of automobiles and buses, reducing the use of coal, expanding solar and wind energy, nuclear energy. But if China makes significant reductions in greenhouse gases and America does very little, then China's sacrifices and efforts, along with the efforts of the rest of the world, will all be for naught. So the world is looking for aggressive progress and leadership from the United States and China working together on so many of these issues.
And it is interesting that they are talking and moving forward. I was at the same event as you last week, the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. And to me, someone sitting on the outside, knowing how the relationship between these two nations is, if they could have that kind of positive feedback between the two countries, if people in China and the United States could hear that, you tend to think the situation would be so much better. And when you talk about climate change, that is the one issue that these two nations really do, as much as anything else, see eye to eye on.
Yeah, there's so many areas of common interest that many people in the world and the public in America and elsewhere are not familiar with. I mean, China and the United States work together to try to end piracy off the coast of Africa. They've had joint military exercises in the Pacific, joint exercises in responding to natural disasters, but also they've worked together in trying to, they were very much working together on the Iran nuclear agreement. And so, and of course, there's a lot of scientific research in trying to find cures for some of the most dreaded diseases. At the same time, there are some very serious points of contention and difference and friction between the United States around trade, human rights, protection of intellectual property, and so forth. And having this type of frank exchange between our two leaders helps set the stage and incentivizes the staff within each country to start moving forward, to have these meetings, to try to bring resolution, at least progress, on these other issues.
Ambassador Locke, I really think that really hits the nail on the head. And when you have these kind of face-to-face meetings, it gets a lot of international press, a lot of domestic press here in the United States. And on the issue of trade, for example, obviously the U.S. has some concerns about the way China has been operating. Biden is quoted as saying the need to protect American workers and industries, where President Xi also said, taking issue with the United States, that he told President Biden the U.S. needs to stop, quote, and I want to read this to make sure I get it right, abusing the concept of national security to oppress Chinese companies. So while they do have a great deal at stake in the global economy, also is going to be affected by the relationship between these two countries, just getting that frank discussion out there certainly is a way to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and let's focus on this.
Well, they need to express their frustrations with each other, rightly or wrongly. Obviously, the United States would disagree with some of the statements made by President Xi, but it's important for him to say it, for Americans to understand where they are coming from, and for the Chinese to understand where we are coming from, so that we could try to find some common ground, so that we can find these so-called win-win solutions. With respect to trade, certainly the Trump-imposed tariffs are hurting both people on both sides of the Pacific, and certainly hurting American consumers, especially with the rise of inflation on household goods here in the United States. Lowering the tariffs would have a big impact on the livelihood of Americans. But the United States is focused on whether or not China will live up to some of the agreements it made with President Trump, and whether or not it will address some of the more fundamental issues of their unfair trade practices, which are violating WTO rules and even contrary to some of the promises China made when it joined the WTO.
Ambassador Locke, we thank you very much for your time. We're going to move on to our panel now. Again, we appreciate it. A lot to pick up on there from Ambassador Locke in the course of the meeting. Let's hear from our panel. Joining us from Beijing is Charles Liu. He is the co-founder of Hao Capital. Also with us from Austin, Texas, is David Firestein. He's the CEO of George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. And also with us from Beijing, our friend Victor Gao. He is an international relations expert and also the chair professor at Soochow University. Welcome all of you to the show. I want to get right to it. If I can begin by talking with you, Charles, your overall reaction, is it fair to call it a meeting, and what's your big takeaway from this?
My biggest takeaway is all the things that they discussed, and such as trade, such as South China Sea and Taiwan and so on and so forth, have been there on the table since President Biden has taken over 10 months ago. So it's taken quite a while for the administration to come to address it with the Chinese leader. Take, for example, the tariffs issue. The tariffs issue, senior American officials have been talking about tariffs harming U.S. consumers, and over 90% burden is taken by U.S. consumers and companies. Why didn't he take it away then? So I think, it could be domestic politics or other factors which has led to the push or the drive for the two leaders to meet this time. It is really very, very late, very, very late in the Biden administration to address some of these issues. So I'm not really that optimistic about, going forward, what will happen, because U.S. administration, much of this was started by President Trump, and President Biden just continued and followed on with the Trump policies.
David, let me ask you to pick up on that. Do you think that President Biden got what he wanted to get across? And do you think there's something positive that everybody can take away from this?
Well, a couple of things. First, I agree with Ambassador Locke that just having the leaders of these two nations sit down together and speak to each other in depth and in some detail on the key issues is important. It's a positive step. Certainly expectations were low. They should be low. The idea that there would be any kind of breakthrough or significant deliverable would have been unrealistic. But I think the very fact that these two men, now presidents of their respective countries, have come together is positive. I think many were heartened by some of the positive tonality that we saw in some of the opening comments and just the body language, the smiles. Yes, of course, there are profound differences and frankly, irreconcilable differences between the United States and China. But that being said, it is important for the leadership of the two nations to come together, air out those disagreements, be clear about what our positions are, and also be clear about where we can work together and cooperate. So I think it was a meeting that achieved the very limited objectives, but important objectives that were set out, and that's to establish a serious communication channel between the two presidents and to send a signal, as Ambassador Locke noted, to the two bureaucracies that it's okay to engage, that we need to engage, and that it's in the self-interest of both countries to do so.
Interesting take. Victor Gao, there have been some recent tensions, obviously, in Taiwan. We heard Ambassador Locke talk a bit about that. And of course, Chinese President Xi was very emphatic in cautioning the United States about any interference. Tell me what you think the key is for China in all this, and for the U.S. not to deviate from the one China policy. That's certainly the stance that President Xi and China has taken for decades.
Well, among all the challenges between China and the United States, the issue of Taiwan is the most challenging one and most potentially explosive one. And from the Chinese perspective, the issue should be very clear. The Taiwan issue is definitely cornered on several key pillars. One is the Cairo Declaration, the Potsdam Declaration, which became the cornerstone of the post-Second World War international order. It's part of the Japanese unconditional surrender. And then the relations between China's mainland and Taiwan is the result of the bloody civil war towards the end of the 1940s. And then in 1979, the United States did the unthinkable. They abrogated the treaty with Taiwan. They withdrew all the soldiers from Taiwan. They canceled the diplomatic recognition of the government in Taiwan. They switched everything to China. Now, under the one China policy, the United States should not be allowed to do anything to further urge political forces in Taiwan which may demand independence. For example, insisting that Taiwan should be allowed into the United Nations, which is an organization of sovereign countries rather than regional government. So I think the good thing from this meeting is that President Biden very clearly stated that the United States still recognizes the one China policy. And China, President Xi Jinping made it very clear that there will be a point of no return. No one should be allowed to push the situation involving Taiwan to go beyond that point of return. And he specified very clearly the consequences of going beyond the point of no return. So I think China and the United States should have better knowledge of each other's bottom line on this issue, especially those political forces in Taiwan headed by Ms. Tsai Ing-wen. They should listen to what China and the United States said during the virtual meeting. They should know that the so-called Taiwan independence is doomed from the start. And the better way is still peaceful engagement, recognizing that there is only one China and both sides of the Taiwan Strait are part of China.
And Mr. Liu, President Biden also stressed that the U.S. knows there's going to be competition. They embrace that competition, but they don't want conflict. Is it still possible for the U.S. and China to have that kind of relationship? Or do you think that as China continues to grow in every sense of the word, economically, from a military standpoint, that it will feel more pressure from the United States?
There's no question it is beginning to feel more pressured by the United States by the day. The relationship that the two countries had, let's say, a decade ago, where when the great financial crisis occurred, where Secretary of the Treasury Hank Paulson visited 3 or 4 times within a span of 7 months, was working together on addressing a global financial crisis. Those days are gone. And I think, for example, even on the Taiwan issue, seeing how China is viewing Taiwan in a way that will deviate from what the U.S. would like to have, they're beginning to crack down on the backbone of Taiwan, namely the semiconductor sector, pushing Taiwan's TSMC to move its facilities outside of Taiwan out. And all of this is a threat to China. The attack on Huawei, the attack on other Chinese companies and ZTE and so on is all political. If the U.S. continues to treat the Chinese as not only a competitor, but a potential conflict enemy, then it's going to be serious. By the way, I think things are getting a little bit better, because the 3 C's from 6 months ago, U.S. officials talking about was competition, collaboration, and confrontation. But at least the word confrontation has pretty much been taken out. So there is improvement. I think improvement is because of the necessity that the administration in Washington now has identified in sectors in which they must collaborate with China, which is a good thing.
And David Firestein, to focus on so much that the two nations do have in common, really the people around the world watching us, you can see it in the media coverage. As I was reading articles from all over the world, the discussions included the DPRK, Afghanistan, Iran, climate, and COVID. Why do you think, I mean, it's kind of an obvious question, but I'd like to hear your take on why you think that what China and the United States discuss and the fact that they do meet really grabs the attention of everybody around the world.
Well, I think there's no question that, when you're talking about the largest and second largest economies, two of the most powerful nations in the world by pretty much any metric, the relationship between those countries has implications for the rest of the world because of the scale and the heft of the two economies, the fact that both are permanent members of the UN Security Council, nuclear powers, and so on. It is a relationship that is enormously consequential. In fact, I think it's the most consequential bilateral relationship, not only in the world, but in the history of the world. And so when these two countries meet, when they agree, when they disagree, the implications of all of those things are felt not only within the confines of the bilateral relationship, but far more broadly. That's certainly true on climate. It's absolutely true in terms of trade and in pretty much every transnational issue that you can think of. So clearly there's a lot of interest in the U.S. and China getting this relationship to a higher level of functionality than we currently see. And I think that's a laudable objective. And I think this particular meeting between President Biden and President Xi helps move the relationship in that direction, even if it's only incrementally. But I think it's a step in the right direction.
Victor, we've heard that President Biden wants competition but not conflict. What does China want?
Well, first of all, when you talk about competition between China and the United States, let's be honest. What do they compete? Now, are you talking about China men's team and U.S. men's team competing in basketball? No, China will never win. Do you talk about China and the United States compete as far as table tennis is concerned? The United States will never win. No, this is not the kind of competition we are talking about. Are they talking about economic competition? Well, economic competition does not matter at the real, very high level of the analysis. I think President Biden and some of the decision makers in the United States are talking about whether the United States wants to maintain its position as the top dog of the world, whether China has any desire to replace the United States as the top dog of the world. Now, if we talk about competition like this, then President Xi Jinping is absolutely right. The world will be big enough to accommodate both the United States and China. Why? Because China has no desire to become the next top dog of the world. China has no commitment and no aspiration at all to replace the United States as the top dog of the world. So I think the two leaders really need to cut the chase and focus on the real thing that matters. That is, when you talk about competition, what are you talking about? And then by the end of the day, I hope they will realize that China is not an enemy of the United States. And whether the United States really has the power to stop China's economic development? No. China's economic development is the megatrend of our time. And sooner or later, in less than 10 years, the Chinese economy will be larger than that of the United States. The U.S. decision makers need to really come to terms with this imminent prospect and make decisions on the basis that China will eventually be larger than the United States, rather than coming up with all the schemes to hold China down without further developing as if there will be no consequences. I'm very confident that the virtual summit between Biden and Xi Jinping have really set up a framework that the decision makers in both countries can gradually come to the term with the futility of confrontation between the two countries, and also the competition which need to be further defined, and eventually realizing that China and the United States need to figure out a way to get along with each other. Whether they like each other or not, that's another issue.
And Mr. Liu, I want to pick up on that because so much global attention on COP26 and climate change, clearly something China and the United States have been working on and will work on in the future. Do you think that the environment, climate change, is something that can really provide a healthy foundation for these two nations to work together?
Absolutely. It's a global issue. It is an issue that it not only addressing carbon capture and carbon emissions and so on, but it also addresses the development of economies and countries. You cannot tell people in India and Africa, sorry, you cannot have electricity because you can't afford anything other than coal. And China and United States both have the capacity, not only in terms of supporting themselves, their own economies in improving, but also supporting other developing countries in improving their green standards. But the issue is right now, I think this is something that should have started much, much earlier, because the collaboration there would demonstrate very clearly the Chinese government's commitment not only to a green planet, but also to collaboration with the U.S. But that's been covered by so many of the attacks on China. I hate to describe it as that, but the vilification of China that has occurred over the course of the last year. So I hope that the green side of it will really accelerate or improve the relationship between the two.
Exactly. David, I want to give you the last word. We don't have a lot of time, but could this be a turning point? Where do you see the relations going between China and the United States?
Well, I think I would hesitate to characterize this as a turning point. I think it is a positive moment in the relationship. I think there is a relationship between these two men, these two leaders, and it's something that can be built on. And I'm glad the meeting occurred. I think it met its objectives, which were limited. But I don't think it is going to change, or any meeting would fundamentally change the fundamentals of the dynamics between the two countries. The fact is, two things. Number one, most of the issues on the U.S.-China bilateral agenda are actually irreconcilable. They are never going to be resolved, and the two countries are never going to see them eye to eye. That is the kind of inconvenient and ugly truth.
We got about 15 seconds, David.
About that. And that being said, I think the question is not how do we manage competition, it's how do we manage irreconcilability. I think there is a better way to do it. I hope our two leaders can lead the way and get this relationship moving in that direction.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all our guests, Charles Liu, David Firestein, and Victor Gao. We're going to leave it there. I'm Sean Calebs here in Washington, D.C. Thanks, everyone, for watching another edition of The Heat.